my specialist SPC here, and finally, welcome to the very first specialist ranking. So guys, this is an idea I have had just swirling through my head for the better part of 3 years. I had a different concept for it back then, but I finally decided I wanted to just take the jump, take the risk, and finally do this specific ranking. And this hopefully is going to become I don't want to say a regular thing, but like maybe you do it a few times a year kind of deal. So basically the concept, if you guys haven't heard about it yet, I take 5 specific movie franchises from a specific genre, and I rank every single film within them franchises. And for the very first one we are doing is going to be sci-fi action. So for this ranking, we are going to be doing Alien, Predator, Terminator, RoboCop, and Planet of the Apes. So we have 32 films to rank, and I am not doing this video alone, you guys. I have got Jason from the Backtrack Cinema YouTube channel. He is joining me on this. And also Nick Cooling from the Movie Ranker channel. Both of their videos will be down in the description below. All 3 of our videos should drop at the exact same time. So after you are done with this, make sure you guys head on down to the comments. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on my ranking. And of course, go down to the description below and check out Jason and Nick's ranking of these 32 films. Also, final disclosure, you guys, my list is not the definitive list. It is just my definitive list. So you guys will definitely disagree with some of the placements I do have for this video. But without further ado, you guys, let's get into the specialist ranking. So in last place for me, easily the worst of all of these 32 films, the worst of all 5 of these franchises, for me personally, is going to be Terminator Genisys. I have never been a fan of this film. I definitely, hands down, think out of every single one of these films, it is the worst. It is the worst Terminator film for me. Might honestly be tied as my overall least favorite film of all time. To me, the only shred of a positive I can give this film in any way, shape, or form is just the fact that on paper, the cast is awesome. You have the return of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the T-800. You have Emilia Clarke here playing Sarah Connor. You have Jai Courtney playing Kyle Reese, and you have Jason Clarke coming in to portray this new version of John Connor. As far as the rest of the film, execution-wise, this film is a mess. It is an utter disaster. It's like they wanted to take everything that was great about each of the previous Terminator films, and they just Frankenstein and wrapped some duct tape around it and called it a movie. Because this was apparently supposed to be an intended trilogy, and I'm so glad this did not go through as a trilogy, because I would not have been invested at all. Jai Courtney, I'm sorry, does not play a good Kyle Reese at all. He is nowhere near the caliber of Michael Biehn. And even Anton Yelchin from the Terminator Salvation film, to me, he is easily the worst portrayal of Kyle Reese by a landslide. I thought Emilia Clarke was okay as Sarah Connor in this. I think Jason Clarke could have been a good John Connor if they didn't ruin or spoil it in the trailers that he was going to be the new Terminator in this film. And with him being the villain and just showing us all that instead of us actually getting to experience that for the first time, I thought was just a gigantic, huge, bad decision. And this to me is the worst portrayal, even honestly the worst acting of Arnold Schwarzenegger in any of these films, and I know there's a film on this list that some people will say he is the worst in, but you'll hear my thoughts on that a little bit later on. But this version of the T-800 is just way too goofy for me. I've never been a fan of this version of the T-800.
It is nice to meet you. Are you kidding me?
So, unfortunately, for a lot of fans, I'm sure they have this a little bit higher up on the list, but for me, Terminator Genisys is just the worst. This is a film out of all the Terminator films I do not own. This is a film, I'll be brutally honest, I will never watch again. Even if I decide to do a marathon of the Terminator films, I will not watch this film again. I barely got through trying to watch it this last time to get ready for this ranking, but Terminator Genisys, easily the worst of all 32 of these films. And only going up by a little bit at number 31 for me is going to be Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This, out of all of these films, is the most boring for me. I really tried to get through this film, but the entire first half literally is beat for beat of the original film. They go through all the same things. Our main actor looks almost identical to Charlton Heston's character from the first film, and it just doesn't do a whole lot of new things for me. And in terms of the last half, it just goes in this wild, weird direction with all these people down beneath the world, and they are just worshiping this big nuclear bomb. I don't know why they went this direction. The only shreds of positives I can give is I still like Cornelius and Zira. I do think they're probably the best characters throughout these original versions of Planet of the Apes. And honestly, just the makeup and the practical effects, they are spot on, just great. That is one of the biggest praises I will give to each and every one of these Planet of the Apes films. But yeah, this is a boring film. Again, this will be another film I probably will never watch again. Number 30 is going to be Alien Resurrection. This I only put a little bit above the previous two because I do actually have a little bit of nostalgia with this film. Only because this is the first legitimate Alien film that I watched. Technically, my real one I watched first was Alien vs. Predator, but again, we'll get to that film later on in the ranking. But while they do some things very well in here, I like the concept of them going so far into the future with this film, and the fact that they have this new version of Ripley. She's clone number 8, and she is enhanced with these alien genes. So she has the super strength, she has super thinking, she has all this different stuff. I think it does work to a degree. And when they do the practical effects, I do think are really good. And some of the action they do in this film is pretty entertaining. But other than that, this film is a gigantic mess. I mean, the ending of the film, you get this just disgusting baby alien hybrid monster thing, and every time I see it, I can't help but laugh. And with what they do with Ripley and that creature is just laughably bad, I'm sorry to say. Overall, the cast I would have to say is definitely the most impressive part of this film as well. I mean, you got Winona Ryder, you've got Ron Perlman, of course you got Sigourney Weaver coming back, you got the legendary and amazing Brad Dourif in here as well. I mean, the cast on its own, again on paper, much like Terminator Genisys, is great. Execution definitely should have been done a lot better than it was. Might be committing my first unpopular cardinal sin on this list, but number 29 for me is the original Planet of the Apes. I tried so hard to look at this film with different eyes. I tried so hard. I just can't get into it. I was not the biggest fan of these original 5 Planet of the Apes films, which you'll come to see here in just a little while, but I didn't like the character that Charlton Heston played. I don't even remember what his name is right now, but I did not like his character at all. I was not the biggest fan at that time of Cornelius and Zira. Throughout the film, they do get a lot better. And again, practical effects wise, awesome. Production wise, awesome. But also, unfortunately, much like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, this film for me is just boring. I've tried. Maybe later on in the future, maybe I can come around to appreciate this film for this being the one that actually started the franchise, but I can't do it. I only give it slight edge above Beneath the Planet of the Apes, just because it is the one that started us off. And hopefully someday I can come around and appreciate this film a lot more, but for now, this is where it's going to land on this ranking. Number 28, Alien vs. Predator Requiem. This, hands down, out of all these films, is the darkest of them all. Literally. There's so many times where you watch this film, you literally have no idea what is going on, because throughout the course of the film, all you really see is like the silhouette of the aliens and predators fighting, especially in that final battle, which could have been so awesome, but you can't actually see what's going on. Not only that, but even just the tone-wise, this is very dark. I mean, there are so many things they do throughout this film that make you uncomfortable, make you not even want to continue watching this film. And that's really the biggest reason why. The characters, too, they don't work for me. A lot of the characters are extremely unlikable. The concept of this nuke coming to this little town and blowing it up in this such little time frame doesn't work, because that thing would have probably landed like minutes earlier before anybody got the chance to escape, and everybody would have died. This is another film I've never been a big fan of. I've only seen this film 3 times in my life. It's another one, honestly, I really don't see myself wanting to watch very often, whether I'm binging Alien or binging Predator films. So, Alien vs. Predator Requiem definitely should have been executed much better than it was. Alien Covenant takes the number 27 spot. This film, I was actually genuinely intrigued and excited to watch when I first sat down and started binging all of the Alien film. Again, we'll talk about Prometheus, but the concept of Prometheus mixed with Alien, I kind of thought would have been a cool concept. But once again, much like all the previous films on this ranking, execution doesn't work. It's a mess. It is a CGI fest with aliens. That's the thing that makes the first 3, even Alien Resurrection as well, a lot better for me, is when they use much more practical effects. That's always the thing that works in any film. Practical over digital. It's something I will say till the day I die. But unfortunately, just again, execution. Trying to mix Alien with Prometheus, it didn't work. This should have just been a straight Alien film. It had the most potential out of probably all these films to being up on the level of the first couple of Alien films, but even execution-wise with the characters, these are some of the dumbest characters I have ever seen in any movie, period. The decisions that they make of just going to this planet instead of going where they actually need to go, with this planet, not being tested or anything, not sending the android out to take a look around for a few days, just hopping right out, ends up stepping on these plants, becoming infected, and then we start getting our alien stuff. This is a slog to get through. I'm hoping this newest film, when it comes out next year, this new Alien film, is on par with the first couple of Alien films, but Alien Covenant, probably the most disappointing film on this list for me. Taking the number 26 spot is the first of the RoboCop movies, and that for me is RoboCop 3. Another disappointing film, especially coming off of the first 2 RoboCop films. This, I don't know what happened. There's so many problems I had with this film. So much heavier on CGI. With this guy not being Peter Weller, you can tell just listening to the voice, even the way that he portrays RoboCop, which you would think you really wouldn't notice seeing him. Also, too, dropping this from a R rating of the first two films down to a PG-13 hurts this film tremendously. While there are still some cool action sequences in here, but they're very far and few in between. And just RoboCop, it's weird to say this about this character, but he's almost too robotic in this. You know, Peter Weller's character in the first two films, his portrayal of RoboCop, had so much more charisma, had a little bit more for him to actually want us to gravitate towards the character and like him. This version it doesn't work. And it's unfortunately a laughable scene, but when you see RoboCop actually get his jetpack and he's flying through the city, I'm sorry, it was laughable for me. It looked like PS1 graphics compared to what I've seen in the previous films. But RoboCop 3, compared to the others, another disappointment on this list. Not the biggest though, but definitely has its flaws. Number 25 is probably the biggest tonal shift of any film on this list. And especially too for the franchise that it's in, it's kind of weird. But number 25 for me is Escape from the Planet of the Apes. The fact that this film almost weirdly seems more like it's a made-for-TV movie, like an episode of a TV comedy drama thing. It's such a weird tonal shift, but to some degrees, I kind of like it. It's a nice little change of pace. I'm actually a little bit more invested to see what is going to happen within this story. But again, execution-wise, it's kind of a mess. None of it makes a lot of sense. It seems like they just needed to give us another thing within the Planet of the Apes franchise. The final act is probably the best part for me, also probably one of the more darker ones, with the unfortunate deaths of Cornelius and Zero, and having the little baby Caesar being taken, which of course leads us into the next film in the franchise. But it's just such a weird tonal shift. The first few films felt like legit sci-fi films. This just seems like it was something made for TV, like a made-for-TV comedic drama featuring apes from Planet of the Apes. So, not a bad film, but definitely the weirdest of all these films. Number 24 is going to be Terminator Dark Fate. Now, I'll be honest, I originally had this a couple of spots higher, but upon this recent rewatch, which I'm just going to say right now is only the second time I have watched this film in this franchise, this I definitely didn't like as much as I did the first time. Not that I really liked it much more. I thought it was at least still a solid Terminator film, but this past time watching it was pretty rough. And I watched all these Terminator films with my brothers except for Genesis. I decided to just suck it up and just try by myself to watch it again. This is just another mess of a film. A lot of people have their problems with Terminator 3, saying it's basically beat for beat, story-wise and stuff, of Terminator 2. This film does also commit that cardinal sin. That is just beat for beat, story-wise, of the original Terminator 2. And with what they do with this film, it's not as enjoyable as I remember it being. I know a lot of people probably put this higher up on their Terminator list, especially. I can say I like Sarah Connor in this quite a bit. I thought she was actually pretty entertaining in this film. I definitely like Arnold a lot more in this film than I did in Genesis. I thought he works a lot better as the actual old man Terminator. And I really like the Rev 9 villain. I think he is actually a very intimidating villain, especially being like a mix of the first two Terminators. He's still got the endoskeleton of Arnold's Terminator, even though it's Legion instead of Cyberdyne and Skynet. And you still got the outer part of like what the T-1000 was. I can't think of what it is right now. It's top of my head for whatever reason. I can willingly tell you that I hate Grace. Grace is the most bland, boring, uncharismatic character of this entire franchise. And not only that, but it seems like she just has the same line all the time. The final battle I thought was okay for the most part. I do have my problems with there being very, very heavy CGI in this film compared to the first two Terminators, and even Terminator 3 to some degrees, where you get the practical effect Terminators and the action and stuff. But this is a film I definitely am very mixed on. Probably the biggest mixed I am of any film on this list. I just wish this would have been executed better. I don't foresee us getting any kind of continuation of this story, especially with the way they end the film. It seems like we're going to get a continuation, but the Terminator franchise, I don't know what they can do with it to try to save it and bring it back to where it used to be. Like, they tried TV worked for a good little while, and then they decided to cancel the show. And then they brought back these next couple of films, and they just weren't executed well. It might be time for the Terminator franchise to take its final rest and just sit on the shelf as one of the most inconsistent franchises in movie history. Number 23 is going to be The Predator. Now, the first time I watched this, I actually really enjoyed this film. I did think it was a pretty solid, well-executed Predator film. Just to point out for you guys, I'm a very casual Predator fan. There's really only 2 films in this franchise I genuinely really enjoy, but upon rewatch, and now knowing all the behind-the-scenes stuff, because this, again, much like Terminator Dark Fate, is only the second time I've watched this film. The execution is just, it's not there, again, much like all the previous films on this ranking. For me, I don't know why they chose to go this direction, because it seemed like a great concept, but with what they do with the characters, the way that this film is definitely edited to really hurts, because there's supposed to be an entire sequence with, I forgot what they're called, like the Loonies or something. They're all together, and they're actually on like a tank with these other couple of Predators, and they're like facing off against people. It is actually shown in the trailers, and we never got to see that sequence. And supposedly there was like an Area 51 sequence we were supposed to get in this film too, and I don't know. This is just another mess of a movie, and I should have probably put this a little bit lower on the list, but I like what they do with the actual Predators in this film. That's why I put it above Terminator Dark Fate and not put it probably as low as other people would. But I would definitely say, besides Alien vs. Predator Requiem, this is hands down the worst of the Predator franchise. Number 22 is Battle of the Planet of the Apes, and this is the last film that I got to watch. When I originally watched the Planet of the Apes films a couple of years ago, I didn't get around to this one, but getting into it this time around, I enjoyed it enough. I do think it is one of the better Planet of the Apes films. Of course, it's just good to see a lot of the action sequences we get. And again, practical effects, I'll continue to say it with all these films. Practical effects are great, but there's not much else for that, you know. It's just another beat for beat of all the previous Planet of the Apes films. You just get a lot more action in this. And I'm not really a fan of any of the human characters. I don't think any of the human characters are very likable. Not that they're supposed to be, because we're supposed to be rooting for the apes to win. So, again, another kind of a mess of a movie, but it's definitely got more entertainment value than any of the previous films on this list. Just barely missing the top 20 is going to be Prometheus. I was so intrigued to watch this film when I first started getting into the Alien franchise, and when I finally got to sit down and watch this film from start to finish, I'm really convinced this was not intended to be an Alien film. I really, truly believe that. Whether or not, you know, Ridley Scott wants to say that it was supposed to be, I feel like he wanted to just make another epic sci-fi film, because he did Alien, he did a film called The Martian that a lot of people seem to really enjoy, and that's just how I feel with this film. I feel like this was intended to be just another new kind of Alien-esque franchise, and it seems almost like the studio was like, no, why don't we just throw alien stuff in here? Let's make this an alien film. And then when you start adding in the alien stuff in here, some works very well. You get a very tense sequence with one of the doctors actually having one of the xenomorph things inside of her. She actually goes to this pod and basically performs surgery on herself to get this thing out of her. I mean, you got androids in this, and of course at the very end of the film you do get to see this early hybrid stage of the xenomorph. In terms of that though, the whole philosophical stuff, I'm sorry to say, it bored me to death. There was not a lot of that kind of things that I like. I come to alien films, obviously, to see the xenomorphs, and you only get a couple of minor sequences with them. But the only reason I put it above the other films on this list is because the concept of this film is very interesting and intriguing to me. And not only that, but I would say character-wise, I do like the characters in this film, but for me, this is not an alien film. Honestly, there was even a small part of me that was like, I don't even want to put Prometheus on here, but if I don't put Prometheus on, then I can't really put Alien Covenant on because it wouldn't make sense. Again, to me, this is not an alien movie. This was meant to be something else, and they just told him, hey, you need to put alien stuff in here. Unfortunately, that is what is keeping this down here at number 21. Bringing us into the top 20 is going to be Predator 2. Now, I will willingly say I enjoyed this film. I honestly, the next Predator movie I talk about, I will be honest, I almost thought about putting it above that, but it's cool to get to see the Predator go from the legit jungle to the concrete jungle. For us to actually be in LA with them actually showing how the Predator does his stuff throughout this new jungle he is in. And I do like the character of Danny Glover. I do like his character quite a bit. But when you start introducing Gary Busey's character in here and just things start to go off the rails with that, you do get some pretty cool kill sequences. I do think that the CGI is touched up just a hair better than the original Predator. But for me, it's just, again, some concepts don't really work. There's a lot of plot holes in this film for me. And again, when you introduce Gary Busey's character, it gets very boring. And this almost just seems like a standard cop film. And you just kind of throw in some Predator stuff here and there. I still like the film quite a bit. I just wish they could have done it a little bit better story-wise. Number 19, personally for me, the best of the original 5 Planet of the Apes films for me is going to be Conquest for the Planet of the Apes. And the reason I put this as my favorite of the original run of films is because this is basically the prototype for Rise of the Planet of the Apes. It has the same story to a degree. We do get to follow Caesar on his journey throughout leading the apes to taking over the planet. And I like the side characters. I do think out of all of them, it's just the more better executed of all these Planet of the Apes films. But again, at times it gets to be a little slow. We do get a little bit too much dialogue at times. It kind of just takes away from the momentum we were getting throughout the film. And I love that Ronnie McDowell comes back to portray Caesar. At times I got a little confused thinking that was actually Cornelius from the original couple of films, but I really enjoy this film quite a bit. Again, and it's probably because I really like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which you are going to see much higher on my ranking. This is just my opinion on this one. I just think out of the original 5 Planet of the Apes films, I personally just think this is the best of them. Now we are at RoboCop 2 at number 18, and I do think this is a pretty solid sequel to the original film. Again, you know, it's almost at times beat for beat for the original film, but we still do have that R rating, which definitely improves it quite a bit. I almost like the story a little bit more in this one, too, because we do get some more high-tech weaponry and stuff in here, and we do get bigger and different versions of the tank creature, I guess. I don't want to say creature, but the machine from the first film. But I gotta say, man, the CGI is awful in this again, much like RoboCop 3. And they try to do like some stop motion stuff. I showed it in my actual debut video for this ranking of RoboCop jumping on this machine, and it just looks awful. I'm sorry to say, it looks just atrocious. But overall, I gotta say this is a very solid sequel to the original. Just wish they would have done a little bit more with it. Number 17. This might be tied for one of my biggest hot takes on this list, but again, this is just how I watch these films. This is just how I perceive these films. So just hear me out when I say this. Barely missing the top half of this ranking is the original Predator film. I know, I'm committing such a huge cardinal sin, because for a lot of people this is the best Predator film. This is the best, possibly the best film out of all these films, but just hear me out. The first time I watched this a couple years ago, I really did like it. I thought it was awesome. I gave it like a solid 4-star. But I gotta be honest, these last couple times I've watched this film, it continues to drop for me. I really think if I had just watched it that one time, waited a couple more years, and I probably would still really like it. I hate the CGI. The look of the Predator when he is, cloaked is god-awful. I'm gonna be honest, I think this film is just a little too campy for me. I know it's got a lot of the big one-liners, you got all the big macho guys from the 80s, you got Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, you got the governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura in here, you got Shane Black himself. I mean, you got so many beefy, manly men in this film. It's just sometimes their dialogue to me is laughable. I'm sorry. For me, it does not work. Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think, at times does very well. At other times, I think he's just saying too many one-liners.
You one ugly motherfucker.
When it comes to the action sequences, he is badass, and especially that final battle with the Predator is fantastic. Practical effects, are great. Like the look of the Predator, the practical effects of the deaths, and the gore and everything we get in this film, they are all peak. It's just, for me, I'm not a fan of the campy dialogue. I don't really like the way that these characters act sometimes. It's still a badass movie, I will say that. It's still a very good, solid action movie for me. But unfortunately, I'm not the biggest fan. I think it's a solid film, but unfortunately, Predator is going to have to stay here in the bottom half of my ranking. And I'll be honest, as if that wasn't unpopular enough, coming in at number 16 for me is going to be Alien 3. I will willingly say, I really, really like this film. I really think this is, personally for me, the third best of the actual Alien franchise. I like how they go back to a more grounded horror roots, how this feels much more like a horror film again. I like the concept of the film too. I really actually enjoy where this film takes place. It seems more isolated again, obviously on a much grander scale though compared to the original film. And I think practical effects wise, when we do get the practical effects of the xenomorphs, is probably the best compared probably to at least the first film. I would say that Aliens probably does it the best. And I really like Ripley in here. I know a lot of people have their problems with the way she's kind of represented in this film. And another thing that, I'll be honest, doesn't entirely bother me, and I know for a lot of people it bothers them, but the biggest problem with people with this film is literally the entire opening credits, because we actually get to somewhat see Hicks and Newt die. And for me, I just think it kind of elevates Ripley's character a little bit more, having them to, not be around anymore. I know that is the biggest cardinal sin for people in this movie, and even just some films in general. When you take an ending to a beloved film, you make a new film, and you basically retcon that entire ending. I can understand why people don't like this movie. I really do. But to me, personally, I just think it's another solid entry into the franchise. I do enjoy this movie a lot. Some of the side characters might not be the greatest, especially when it comes to our actual prisoners we have in this film. And CGI is atrocious. But I like this film a lot. And I understand if you guys don't like it, I really do. I would at least encourage you to try to watch this with some different eyes. I really don't quite know how to explain it, but As somebody who's also just a casual Alien fan, this film works for me in a lot of ways, and I do genuinely like it. So Alien 3 for me comes in at number 16. Number 15 is going to be the Planet of the Apes 2001 remake. I like this film a lot too, I'll be honest. I really wouldn't entirely consider this to be a remake to a degree, even though I know it's labeled as a remake. I definitely think practical effects wise, this is the best of the series. I absolutely love the way the apes look in here. Not that they were not impressive, back in like the 60s and when they were continuing on with the franchise. I do still think all the practical effects looks of every ape in the franchise looks phenomenal. And I'll be honest, the story works for me the best, I don't entirely mind Mark Wahlberg's character. There's at times he's pretty laughably bad. But the action is great in this film. I really like it. I like the story. I like most of the characters. Our main villain, Ape, I actually think is highly underrated as one of the biggest villains probably out of any of these films on this list. I do. I like this film quite a bit. I definitely think it's one of the better, more practical looking Planet of the Apes films for me. And speaking of remakes, coming in at number 14 is going to be the RoboCop remake. And I definitely know this is another unpopular opinion. I'm going to have quite a few more of these, honestly, going up on this list. I like this film, too. I like Joel. I don't remember. Joel McKinnon, I think is his name. The guy from Suicide Squad. I actually really like him in this film. I think he portrays a very, very good RoboCop. I also like, too, how this version of RoboCop isn't just like a legit stiff robot like the first couple of movies. I like how he's actually more of like a human. He actually can move around like a human, work around like a human, and just, even too, I love the suit. The suit in this is probably my favorite suit of the franchise. Even getting an amazing actor like Sam Jackson in here it elevates the film even higher for me. And to me, this is just a little bit more of a believable version of this character. Like, he still seems human when he is actually still RoboCop. Where as soon as he actually becomes RoboCop, like in the original film, he's just legitimately more robotic. And I like that. That to me just works so much better for me as an overall arc for this character. There are times CGI is pretty rough, and when we get to the last half, it seems like everything is just pretty rushed. But I like this remake quite a bit. I think it's one of the most underrated remakes out of pretty much any remake I've ever watched. People genuinely hate this film. I don't see why. I think it's a great action film. And obviously, it is my second favorite RoboCop movie. Number 13 is going to be Alien versus Predator. Man, I gotta tell you, I was so highly anticipated to see this film. I remember watching the trailers and stuff for this film when it was getting ready to come out. And when I did finally get to see it, man, I fell in love with this. This is another great crossover film event, much like Freddy vs. Jason the year prior. I think it's great. I really do. I think really my only huge problem with it is it's not R-rated. Obviously, you bring two very R-rated franchises together and you make it PG-13. It doesn't work doing it like that. And even to just kind of the concept of this film is a little weird. Like how there's just this pyramid underneath Antarctica and predators and aliens are just down there kind of fighting each other, getting prepared for bigger battles. And CGI, like a lot of these films, CGI is kind of rough. At times it works, at times it looks pretty laughably bad. This is another solid entry into both Alien and Predator franchises, and if it would have been R-rated, man, I think this could be in par with like the original couple of films in each of the franchises. RoboCop, the original, takes the number 12 spot. And I'll be honest, out of all these films, this is the biggest surprise out of all these, because I always thought these were just like maybe goofy little like cop films. I didn't expect them to be so like hard R. That's the thing that surprised me the most, especially when you get to see Patrick Murphy actually get killed by Kurtwood Smith's character. Like, I was in shock of how hard of an R this film went, because I don't know why, I was always under the impression this was like a PG, maybe light PG-13 movie, and that's what really blew me away. And the story, the action in this is great. Again, it's just another great cop film, but with hard R, and you have a legit RoboCop in this film. The only thing that hurts this film is, while I do like Peter Weller's character in here, there's just times he's just too stiff for me with his line delivery and stuff. I've tried. I think it's a great film overall, like I said, but there's just some things about the actual RoboCop character I'm not the biggest fan of. And again, maybe another unpopular opinion. I think I might like Joel Kinnaman's version of this character better, but this is the biggest surprise out of all these films, and I do really enjoy it, and I gladly would sit down and rewatch this film. Just barely missing the top 10 is going to be Predators. When I watched this film the first time, I really didn't care much for it. There weren't a lot of things that I liked about it, but this last rewatch, I don't know what it was. If it was just the mood I was in, or if I just didn't really gravitate towards the film the first time I watched it. This, to me, is probably the best sequel of the Predator franchise. Obviously, it is one of my favorites of the franchise. I like the concept. To me, it's weird. I kind of, the way I look at this film, it's almost like Suicide Squad mixed with Hunger Games, and you just throw some Predators in here. Like, that's kind of the way I look at this film. And those are both films I do really enjoy. I like a lot of it's a star-studded cast. Like, the cast is awesome in here. While I have some problems with his version of the character, which we'll talk about here in a minute, Adrian Brody, I mean, Oscar-winning actor. You've got Topher Grace in here. You got Danny Trejo. You got Lawrence Fishburne. I mean, the cast in this is awesome. Probably out of all these films on this list, probably one of the best cast of characters of any of these films, personally. It's just, for me, why my overall biggest problem I have with this film is Adrian Brody's character. Like, it's like he's trying to be what Dutch was in that first film, but it's like he's mixing his voice with, like, Christian Bale's Batman. And he's just probably the most laughable character out of the bunch. Even after watching this a few times, this character still doesn't work for me. But I love the action. I love that we are back in the jungle for this film. And honestly, might have some of my favorite Predator action out of the entire series for me. But it's just, again, Adrian Brody's character. He's just really what holds this film back so far for me from even possibly being my favorite Predator movie of the franchise. Alright, you guys, we're here in the top 10, and I gotta be honest, these are all films I think are just fantastic. These are some of my favorite films within these franchises. Obviously, it's why we're doing this ranking. But these are just genuinely films I really enjoy watching. So, taking us into the top 10, for me, is going to be Terminator Salvation. I don't know what it is. This has been a film I've loved. This is the first and honestly the only Terminator film I've ever seen in the theater. This is a film that we've been just dying to see. We always saw the stuff in the past, you know, the Terminator coming back to the past to protect whoever the story is focused on. This time we are legitimately in the future. We are in the future with John Connor in the middle of the war against Skynet and the Resistance. And it's a great war movie. That's the best way I can word this. It's almost like if you watch Rogue One within Star Wars. I mean, this is a straight up war movie with Terminators and with characters from the Terminator franchise. Christian Bale, easily the second best John Connor of the franchise. I like him. Mostly the second act, I will say. I cannot stand John Connor at all in the entire second act of this film. I really like Sam Worthington's character. I think he's one of the most underrated characters in the Terminator franchise, especially with just how important he is to the franchise. And even too, our other characters, again, Anton Yelchin in here. The late great Anton Yelchin portrays Kyle Reese. We also have Bryce Dallas Howard in here playing Kate Brewster. I think she's not as good as Claire Danes was in Terminator 3, but I still think she's a great addition to this cast. As far as the things that don't really work, again, I brought it up, John Connor to me in in the second act is not very likable. The third act is just, your basic beat for beat stuff that you see in all the Terminator films in a big factory. And I think what really hurts that third act is actually having this just not very good looking CG Arnold coming out in the nude facing off against John Connor. It would have been a much more effective battle if it had just been the endoskeleton of the T-800. I think that would have worked miles better than that. But otherwise, man, again, the importance of Marcus in this film. He's basically the very first infiltration Terminator, which of course Kyle Reese does talk about in that first film, and basically what the T-800 is in that first film as well. He teaches Kyle Reese basically to be the badass Kyle Reese that we do see in that original Terminator film. This guy just has such an importance in this franchise. I think he's just one of the most underappreciated characters in this entire list of films, as well as characters. So for me, I might like Terminator Salvation more than anybody else does, but I still think this is a great film. Action film it's awesome. Obviously with it being a number 10, it is one of my favorites out of all 32 of these films. And it's time for the next unpopular opinion. Coming in at number 9 for me is going to be Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. This is another film I love. I understand the hate for it. That's always the thing I can say. I understand why people do not like this film at all. I totally get it. But this is probably, out of all these films, all 32 films, the most nostalgic for me. I remember seeing the trailers for this. I remember playing the game with my stepbrothers, and I remember going to the theater. This is why I have such a fond memory and I have such a fond love of this film, because this came out around the same time as the Hulk movie from 2003 with Eric Bana and Liv Tyler in it. And my mom, who she was dating at the time, her boyfriend's brother wanted to take me to a movie, and we ended up going to Hulk. I wanted to go see Terminator 3. That ended up not happening, obviously. And I had to sneak away. I had to go to the bathroom, and right by the bathroom was the theater playing Terminator 3. And I remember going into the theater. I stood there for 10 to 15 minutes watching the film, and it was at the part where they're inside of the hangar and Arnold's been hacked and he's trying to kill John Connor. I remember watching all that. So I do have a lot of nostalgia for this film. Honestly, might be my favorite look of the Terminator. Again, I definitely know that is unpopular, but might be my favorite look for Arnold's character. I don't mind Nick Stahl, honestly, as John Connor in this. I think he's highly overhated for his portrayal of John Connor. I will say he is not anywhere in comparison, though, to Eddie Furlong, obviously. And some CGI is pretty rough in here as well, but to me, the biggest flaw with this film is the TX. I used to never be bothered by the TX. I used to really like the character, but she hands down is the worst villain of this franchise, even over the John Connor Terminator we get in Genesis. But I love the story. The story really works for me. I love the characters, most of them in here. Claire Danes is awesome as Kate Brewster in this film. She's almost the centerpiece of this story, besides John Connor. And I'll be honest, the other reason I put this up so high is the ending. To me, this is the best, at least tied for the best ending of the franchise for me personally. Because this is actually an ending that, terrified me as a kid. The fact of, death being this very dark thing. Obviously, we're all going to experience it someday. This is just a film I genuinely love. It's one of my favorites of the Terminator franchise, and I will even be honest with you. I thought about putting it above a specific film on here, which obviously I didn't, and we'll get to that film. This is a film that just works for me. I don't think it deserves the hate that it gets, personally, but I can understand why you guys would put this lower on your ranking. But Terminator 3, for me, takes the number 9 spot. Number 8, my favorite film of the Predator franchise is going to be Prey. This film blew any expectations I had out of the water. Like, I love how just grounded this film is. I love it. The Predator we get in this film, he doesn't have all like the high-tech stuff we're so used to. He doesn't have like the plasma rifles or anything like that. All he has is a shield, a spear, and he's got his invisibility ability. That's really about all that he has in this film. I do like the character of Naru. She reminds me a lot of Mulan. That's kind of another reason why I like it so much, is because this is one of those films, and I hate to even have to say this and bring this up, but it's just, I kind of have to. This is one of those films where they talk about, how bring us a strong female character, and I do think that she does it. I think she's up there in line with Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor. That's just my opinion. You guys don't have to like it, but I hope you at least respect my reasoning why. And the whole sequence with the Predator killing all of those poachers in that burnt part of the forest, I love it. That is just an amazing sequence. The two things that hurt this film from being even higher up on this list: the dialogue is almost too modern aged for the time it's supposed to be taking place. It's supposed to be, I believe, in like the 1700s or like the 1800s, somewhere around there. And the CGI is pretty laughable. Like, most, if not all, the animals in this film are all CGI. Like, to me, I don't understand why you couldn't get actual animals to have in this film. Like, that just baffles me how we need CGI animals and CGI planes and all sorts of stuff in all these films nowadays. I love Prey. I personally do think it's the best of the Predator franchise for me, and to me it works the best as a Predator film, and that's why it's up here at number 8. Number 7 is going to be Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I'll just be honest with you guys. The next 3 that I'm going to be talking about, including this one, are all the new films within this newest trilogy of Planet of the Apes films. For me, they're so close with how I put them in my ranking, but I love this film. This is another film I love all the rest of the films on here, so you're going to probably hear me say that a couple more times, but I really like this one. This, to me, is probably, out of most of the Planet of the Apes films, I love the story probably the most. I'm surprised when I heard that James Franco was going to be in this, and I actually thought he put in a very good dramatic performance, which is weird because I've only ever seen him in the Sam Raimi films, and he was slowly starting to get into films with Seth Rogen, so I kind of thought that was a bit of a weird shift for him, but it worked very well. Caesar, played by the amazing Andy Serkis. I mean, is incredible. This might honestly be the best character he's ever played on film. And again, this is just almost like another weird like apocalypse movie too, like a slow infection of the world. Obviously, of course, the next 2 films in the franchise do go on to talking about the virus a little bit more, but it's just the way that they set it up. Like, this almost to some degrees feels almost weirdly like a zombie movie to me at times. Just with the concept and what they actually do with the apes and everything, how they all slowly become infected. They all start to slowly learn how to talk and think very highly. The only 2 things that kind of hurt this film for me: the CGI wasn't quite there, where we eventually get it in the next couple of films where it looks absolutely flawless, but it wasn't quite there. And you really don't get a whole lot of action. Obviously, this is more of a prequel type story, so obviously you're not really going to get a whole lot of action in this, but the story is what grabs me when I watch this film. I love the story of these Apes films. So, number 7 is Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And again, guys, these next 2, they were very hard for me to place where I place them, because they're both phenomenal films, but I landed on number 6 being War for the Planet of the Apes. I watched this for the first time, I want to say just last year. This film is amazing. Like it's almost borderlining a masterpiece for me, honestly, along with the next film on the slate. But this is the best performance by far out of all these films of Andy Serkis, again playing the awesome Caesar character. I actually liked Woody Harrelson's villain in this. He might be my favorite villain of the series compared to the next film I talk about, where I think he is the best villain of the series. I love this film. Like, I even like how we get different versions of different apes of the story. You know, we get Caesar and when he's captured and what he's going through. We get the orangutan with the little girl and the younger ape too. We get to kind of see a little bit more of Cornelius' story in here as well, which I believe he's going to be the next centerpiece again of the Apes franchise when we get Kingdom for the Planet of the Apes next year, which almost with just that and the new Alien film coming out next year made me almost want to wait to do this ranking, but I decided to do it anyway. And again, look-wise, this is the best out of all the Planet of the Apes films when it comes to the CGI. Like I said, it's hardly noticeable. You literally look like you're watching a legit ape talking to you. And, you know, production set-wise, I love it. I love the way that they set up this actual, like, kingdom or this sanctuary for these apes. I've always loved that since I saw it in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. It's just, for me, throwing in this young girl, I just kind of thought was a little bit weird. That's literally like a nitpick for me at this point. This is, like I said, it's borderline a masterpiece for me. And possibly over a couple more rewatches, this might go to 5 stars for me. Which obviously, of course, guys, bringing us into the top 5, the best of the Planet of the Apes franchise is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This has probably the darkest story, the darkest tone, and just some of the darkest moments throughout the entire Planet of the Apes franchise. The character of Koba, I brought him up. Well, I didn't really bring him up, but I brought up the best villain of the Planet of the Apes series. This, to me, is the best villain. Just how dark and how far he's willing to go to actually kill Caesar and what he's trying to do to get rid of Caesar. Their final battle at the end, I love it. It's great. And again, cast-wise, we have Jason Clarke back in here again. I think he is a great actor in this film. He definitely does better than he did in Terminator Genesis, in my personal opinion. You also got the awesome Gary Oldman in here as well, just coming off of his films with Christopher Nolan in the Dark Knight trilogy. Again, just the opening. Honestly, the opening might be my favorite opening of pretty much any of these films. I mean, with all the apes up in the trees, with this just dark rain coming down, they're chasing after all these horses and all these animals trying to survive. The only shred of a nitpick is, and I don't know what the actor's name is, but he plays a villain in Arrow. His character just doesn't work for me. He's just kind of one of those, you know, typical asshole characters that we see in these films. So, but again, besides that, this film is damn near flawless. I love it to death. Might even make its way up into my favorite films of all time, but definitely the best Planet of the Apes film, and definitely worthy of being here in the top 5 of the specialist ranking. Number 4, the original Ridley Scott's Alien. This film honestly is a masterpiece. Like, this hands down is Ridley Scott's masterpiece. I mean, you have some of the most iconic moments, some of the most iconic characters out of any sci-fi horror film that has ever been produced. I mean, again, the debut of Ellen Ripley. Of course, you got the debut of the Xenomorphs. You got the iconic chestburster scene with John Hurt's character that probably one of the biggest surprises, one of the best jump scares in all of horror history, in my opinion.
Oh, God!
And just how this film is just so claustrophobic, how it's just so contained into this one area. Not only that, but with him expanding things with the story. Obviously, he does it miles better in this than he does in Prometheus, because that film gets so convoluted after a while. But you also have your fans either Alien or Aliens is their preferred film. And for me, obviously, you guys know which film I prefer, but as to where I put it in this ranking, you guys will see. But this is one of the best sci-fi horror films of all time, even though this is sci-fi action, but I would still consider this to be a sci-fi horror film. The only little nitpick I have with this film is I think at times it does drag just a little bit in the story, but not by very much. And our other female character, I've never been a fan of her, like, at all. I don't even remember what her name is at the top of my head, but she's just never been one of my favorite characters within the Alien franchise. This definitely is worthy of where it is on my ranking, and again, to me, this is the best film Ridley Scott has delivered by far. This might be possibly my biggest unpopular opinion on here, I'm not really sure, but just barely missing us here at the top two, but still respectfully taking the third place here on my ranking is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I already know for a lot of people this is probably going to be their number one. I highly respect that opinion. This, I will say, is probably one of the greatest action films ever created. One of the best sci-fi films ever created. Obviously one of the best sci-fi action films ever made. And even for some people, one of the best films ever made. And I highly respect that opinion. I mean, this is probably tied as James Cameron's best film he's ever created for me. Again, I know people will say it's his best film. I respect that. I mean, this is kind of basically what you want to do with a Terminator film. This is the best, probably, acting of the Terminator from Arnold Schwarzenegger of the franchise for a lot of people. We introduced the character of John Connor, played by Eddie Furlong. Unfortunately, didn't go on to play the character anymore after this, unfortunately. This film has the best action out of all the Terminator franchise. This has some of the biggest and most iconic moments of the Terminator franchise. And has probably, for a lot of people, the best villain of the Terminator franchise. And I do think it is, again, just like with War of the Planet of the Apes, as I talked about, it's borderline a masterpiece for me. But this is probably going to be my hottest take out of any of these. My only problem with this film is I just think at times Linda Hamilton overdoes it with her acting. There's times where she goes a little too above and beyond with her acting and her deliveries of lines. To me, the best parts of her in this film are at the end of the first act when they break her out and when they're actually fighting against the T-1000 in that factory. But that whole middle part where she's trying to kill Miles Dyson, I don't like her line delivery there at all. She's so over the top with things, it just takes me out of the moment. And the other reason I don't have it any higher is I don't have the most nostalgia with this film. I unfortunately watched it as a whole for the very first time back in 2015. I only ever got to see like bits and pieces of the film. I never got to see it as a whole until I bought the Skynet edition of Terminator 2. So those are really the only couple of things that hold this from being at least number 2, possibly even number 1. But I do still think this is an amazing movie. I gladly watch this and look forward to seeing this each and every single time that I watch the Terminator films. So Terminator 2 Judgment Day just barely misses being the best of the series. Alright, you guys, we are here at the top 2, and if you guys haven't seen by process of elimination, we have got the original Terminator from 1984, and we of course have Aliens. Now, I will be honest, this was the hardest part of this entire ranking for me. I can't tell you how many times over the last few weeks after I revealed this as to which one I actually wanted to put in first place and second place. Because one film I have a whole lot of nostalgia for and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And the other film I just think is just one of the best films, honestly, probably ever made in general. So, I did officially land on my number 2, and even though it does hurt me not putting this at number 1, Number 2 is going to be the original Terminator film. This is my favorite Terminator film of the entire franchise. I love the story, I love the characters, I love Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator in this film. This, to me, is the best Terminator we've gotten in the franchise. Very close, though, is the T-1000. Again, the story is what really grabs me every time I watch this film. Just how in-depth they go with talking about the things that happen in the future, what they do with Sarah Connor in this film, and just the way that they actually handle the Terminator in this film, I think is just great. And another reason I hold this in such high regards, because I will willingly say this is one of my favorite horror films of all time, because I do consider this film to be a slasher film. I really do. Like, if you look at this with that concept, it is literally a slasher film. This Terminator is just going around just killing people. Obviously, it's with guns. You're not seeing stabs or anything like that, but the only thing that just barely narrowed this out from being number 1, because I was so sure this was going to be my number 1, is towards the third act when we get the stop motion CGI version of the Terminator, the actual endoskeleton. It's not very well done. Also, the scene too with the practical effects Arnold head cutting out his eye and moving around. It's pretty dated. And otherwise, this to me is, besides those 2 nitpicks, to me this is a flawless film. To me, this is honestly the best Terminator film of the entire Terminator franchise, but was just barely narrowed out by my number 1. And speaking of my number 1, the best film out of all 32 of these films is James Cameron's Aliens. This film is a masterpiece. This is a film I literally have no problems with. I have no nitpicks. I have no big grievances with. This to me is just the best film out of all of these ranking videos I've done. This to me is the best film out of this entire ranking, because out the effects, I've got to keep praising effects in most of these films. They're great. Like, the practical effects are the best of the Alien franchise, and just the best in general of all 32 of these films. This is the best version of Ellen Ripley that we have ever gotten in the franchise. This is some of the most badass action you were ever going to see in any of these films, period. You have a lot of great characters. You got all the Marines that we get in here. We, of course, get the little girl Newt in this film, who you just can't help but, gravitate towards and feel sorry for everything that's gone on with her during this film. And the battle against the Queen is so good, especially the iconic line that Ripley says, getting ready to fight her.
Get away from her, you bitch!
This is just a masterpiece. This is probably James Cameron's best film that he has done for me personally. This is a film I definitely will treasure to watch again, and it's my favorite film of the Alien franchise, and personally for me is the Sci-Fi action specialist. So Aliens takes the number 1 spot. And guys, that is going to do it for this long ranking video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, make sure you guys go down below in the comments section. Let me know your guys' thoughts and opinions of my ranking. Also, again, go down to the description below. Make sure you guys go check out Jason and Nick's versions of this ranking, because we are all going to disagree. We all have our own opinions on these movies. And also, too, if you guys want to join in, you guys can make your own specialist ranking video. You guys can drop it down below in the comments section. I will go and watch it, and I will definitely shout you guys out whenever I can. But I've really enjoyed doing this. I can't wait to go back and do another ranking video of some sorts. I do want to make this at least a yearly thing. I'd like to do this at least once, maybe twice a year, depending on the actual rankings I want to do. But once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Go check out Nick and Jason's videos down in the description box below. And with that being said, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.